Yes, it's 14 minutes to 8 o'clock. I don't know how many times I've spoken on this program about the disgraceful performance in New South Wales of this ICAC, it's supposed to be Independent Commission Against Corruption. Its abuse of basic principles of justice, its willingness to leak against individuals to sympathetic media in a way which damages those individuals, its failure to make public all evidence in relation to individuals, and yet on the basis of this disgraceful outfit headed up by this David Ip and then Megan Latham. And I suppose you can't blame the government because these ICAC made reports to Premier O'Farrell, and on the basis of those reports, O'Farrell ripped up the licence for a proposed mine at Doyles Creek in the Hunter Valley. Shareholders in the listed New Coal Resources were left with nothing, no compensation, nothing. They were innocent, totally innocent parties. They're trying to get a fair hearing from Macquarie Street. A number of investors have sent me copies of letters they've sent to Premier Berejiklian. I have written to Gladys Berejiklian about this endlessly. The responses, quite frankly, are an insult, and they don't come from the government. Karen Smith, God knows who she is, Deputy Secretary of Premier and Cabinet, continues to write back to the investors, same letter, to every one of them. And all the investors, no matter what they say in their letter, get the same response, word for word. I've been asked to write to you in relation to this correspondence. In 2014, the decision was made not to compensate investors who may have been affected by the licence cancellation. The decision was not made lightly. The then Premier's second reading speech for the introduction of the Mining Amendment ICAC Operations Jasper and Acacia Bill 2014 describes the factors that were considered. I'm advised the position remains unchanged to that reached in 2014. I mean, these people have sought answers, and they're entitled to answers, and they get a backhander. This is not going to pass muster. We're not going away. These people have been appallingly treated, and the public are starting to wake up that individuals are being dudded and the government is doing nothing. Thanks to people like the Liberal MLC Peter Phelps and Chris Merritt of the Australian newspaper, it's quite clear the story is even worse than that. Indeed, there may well be people in jail as a result of the withholding by ICAC of what's called exculpatory evidence, that is, evidence beneficial to the accused. Dr Peter Phelps has addressed in the Parliament of New South Wales, the upper house, of course the Liberal Party don't like Phelps, the issue of whether Ian McDonald, who's in jail, was obliged to consult Cabinet before awarding the Doyles Creek mining licence. Now, it's clear that the inference was drawn that because he didn't, he was trying to hide something. But it's also clear that ICAC took evidence in secret and didn't make that public. Now, the secret transcripts of ICAC interviews have been exposed by the same Peter Phelps. Nathan Rees, the former Premier, is on the record in the case against McDonald as saying publicly that the mining licence issue ought to have been put to Cabinet. But now Peter Phelps has released secret transcripts of in-camera ICAC interviews with Nathan Rees, which say the opposite. And during those interviews, Rees said the Doyles Creek project would not necessarily have had to go to Cabinet. One of the factors in the conviction of McDonald, and indeed Maitland, and you can rope in a stack of others, was the fact that, well, they must have been up to something, and it must have been crook because they withheld everything from Cabinet. But in secret evidence to ICAC, never made available to the government, Premier Nathan Rees said that the Doyles Creek project didn't necessarily have to go to Cabinet. It was a training mine, and you wouldn't expect significant royalties to be flowing from it. In other words, Rees said one thing publicly and was praised by ICAC because it helped nail McDonald and Maitland, but he said something quite different during secret ICAC interviews. Peter Phelps in the Parliament earlier this year quoted parts of secret interviews with Christina Keneally, in which she confirmed that even, quote, matters where there is a potential large revenue stream to be generated do not always have to be put to Cabinet. But these secret interviews are covered by permanent suppression orders. What kind of show are we running here? The only reason Parliament and the public know about them is because Peter Phelps has used parliamentary privilege to reveal their contents, and people are in jail. It gets worse. Not only did these reports on Operations Jasper and Acacia by ICAC ignore secret evidence by two former premiers, Christina Keneally and Nathan Rees, that would have weakened, if not destroyed, the ICAC case, then as a result, the government expropriated coal exploration licences without compensation, and that's embroiled New South Wales and the federal government in a completely avoidable debate with the government of the United States because Americans are shareholders in New Coal Resources. And this has all breached a free trade treaty, where US assets have been taken by Australian governments without due process of law, and the free trade treaty provides that there must be adequate compensation. Not only did the New South Wales government refuse to compensate the Americans and ban them from challenging the expropriation of their assets in court. You can't believe this is a democracy. Blokes like McDonald were sentenced to 10 years in prison for misconduct in public office after a trial in which lawyers from the office of the DPP told the defence team that they had disclosed to them all the evidence the DPP had received from ICAC, except it didn't receive the evidence given in secret by Nathan Rees and Christina Keneally. The exculpatory evidence was kept from the court. This is beyond belief. Well, it gets worse again, because ICAC also failed to disclose that one of its most important reports relied on evidence from a brain-damaged witness who had amnesia, of whom Peter Phelps, again, the Liberal MP described in Parliament last year, this fellow Paul Gardner-Brooke, on whom ICAC relied, had been shown to be a self-confessed liar and fraud. He was praised by ICAC. Chris Merritt has shown tremendous guts and insight to write about this. This is a very disturbing chapter in New South Wales politics, and it's not going to go away until the chapter is closed. Chris, good morning.
Good morning, Alan.
How bad does this get?
Well, I really don't know. It's just going to continue to dribble out in bits and pieces until there's a proper inquiry. It seems pretty clear to me that there was either ineptitude or something worse going on inside the corruption watchdog. It's a terrible thing to think about, but there might well be corruption inside ICAC. And in that case, who do you refer it to? I think Parliament's made a terrible mistake in setting this place up in a way that means that factual errors cannot be uncovered. It's impossible under New South Wales law to test the merits, not the law, but the merits of any ICAC report. Now, that creates an incredible moral hazard. It provides no incentive to weed out inept officers or bent officers, because they know that their mistakes will never be uncovered.
They can't be challenged.
That's right. That's exactly right. It denies individuals a day in court. If you are accused of wrongdoing in this country, it's the birthright of everybody to have your day before an independent court to answer any accusations that the state might put to you. But when it comes to ICAC, they can make incredibly damaging accusations about people that are taken up by the media, tainting the pool of potential jurors, which has an inevitable effect of making it very, very difficult for people who have been smeared by ICAC in a flawed report to get a fair trial before an independent court. That's not the fault of the court. That's the fault of the way the New South Wales Parliament, Labor and Liberal, have set up this system. It's just...
How can an MP sit in the Parliament and condone this sort of treatment? Wouldn't you sort of say, well, there but for the grace of God might go I?
Look, Peter Phelps is an exception.
He is.
He, unlike most politicians, broad generalisation, are scared to death of ICAC. They're scared to death of the other side of politics saying, oh, look, you're just soft on corruption because you want to impose these checks and balances on the corruption watchdog. And so as a result, the normal system of Parliament has failed. Normally, when you get an agency of the executive that goes rogue, runs off the rails, you can rely on the opposition to haul it back into line to make a fuss. And if that doesn't happen, you can normally rely on the media to jump in and do the same.
Yep.
But if the media is on the quality drip from this rogue agency, the normal imperative of many reporters is not to burn your sources. So as a result, we've had this entire institutional failure going on in New South Wales, and the result is that horrific things like the suppression of exculpatory evidence, New South Wales getting itself into a trade dispute with the United States of America over what amounts to the theft of American assets and the ban on Americans getting into court to say, what's going on? Can I have my money back, please?
But then ignoring secret evidence, then praising the evidence of this fellow Brooke, but not mentioning his brain injury, and suddenly fell.
The Gardner Brook incident is absolutely outrageous. I mean, what sort of investigator receives a report that says, oh, by the way, your star witness has got brain damage, is suggestible, i.e. can't really tell whether things happened in the past or not, has that report and then puts this fellow into a public hearing to give evidence? I mean, somebody knew inside ICAC. I'm not saying that Commissioner Ip knew. I'm not saying that the counsel assisting at the time, Jeffrey Watson, I'm not saying they knew. But somebody had that report inside ICAC. We know that for sure because there's correspondence from the Office of the New South Wales Director of Public Prosecutions that says that. It says that ICAC had this report and then handed it over to the DPP last month. 5 years after ICAC produced a report.
And then basically withheld the evidence, both Keneally, the report, Elizabeth Keneally and Rees, and then lied to the government in the report that they submitted to the government.
Look, the most shocking thing about this is that the Parliament of New South Wales now knows that it's been misled on 3 occasions that we know of for sure by ICAC, misled by ICAC. You spelled them out. The Acacia report ignored evidence that went against the ICAC thesis that would have undermined the credibility of that report. The Jasper report did not mention anywhere that the star witness, Gardner Brook, had amnesia and brain damage. Mm-hmm. And he was a star witness. Now, that would have undermined the credibility of that report.
And
Parliament has remained silent.
Absolutely.
I can't believe it.
Well, we won't. And I'll come back to you and we'll do a bit more homework and I'll talk to you again next week, Chris.
Okay, Alan.
Good to talk to you.
Right.
It's depressing, isn't it?